Welcome to 8 at 8. I know that no matter who you are this morning, you need the courage to listen. Whether you are listening to those who are protesting against social injustice or your spouse whose faults became really obvious to you decades ago, or whether you need the courage to turn on the news station that you don't agree with, or the patience to really hear your child whose perspective seems so immature. I want you to think of someone this morning who is a person of peace. Go ahead. Now I want you to remember, how did you feel when you were around them? One person of peace in my life is the person whose piano this was for decades and decades. It's my grandmother, my Nana. And I can feel on the inside of my body what it felt like to be around her, because she was a person of peace. She was a person who had the courage to listen. I woke up this morning with a song stuck in my head. It's called Turnin over Tables. And I always like to hear the story behind the song. So I listened to a podcast this morning from the writers, David Gungor, John Arndt, and they were interviewing another person named John Huckins, who is the leader of this global immersion project. It's a peacemaking training organization. And I want you to listen to how he described what his organization does. He said peace is all about giving up one's life for the flourishing of another. Giving up one's life for the flourishing of another. Peace is choosing to move toward those who look and think and believe differently, even at the cost of our own reputation. Now, I was thinking this morning, this idea that peace is countercultural. It's definitely countercultural in your home, whoever it is that you live with, because we all have this tendency to live for number one, right? And so number two is not somebody that we're honestly going to listen to all that in-depthly, unless it's just so that we can learn enough about what they think and say and do to make sure we keep them number two, right? That's all of our tendencies, every one of us, whether it's our spouse or our kids. We're just trying to look out for ourselves. Peace is also countercultural to the American culture. It's countercultural in many ways to American Christianity. And so I really want you to think this morning about the movement. Does peace have this free-flowing movement in your heart? And I specifically want you to think about listening. Are you willing to engage with the different, to someone who is different than you, who has a different perspective than you? Because when you do that, it's not about compromising your faith or your perspective, but it actually is going to reflect a much more holistic version of your faith, of the faith. I know that from my studies at a university for these past 5 years, that kind of is in a very different home or center than the part of Christianity that I grew up with. And from being there for year after year, I have been so enriched by the other. It was an amazing experience to ride in a priest car for the first time in my life, to be taught by a nun, to hear firsthand testimony from genocide in Burma, firsthand. To hear a woman talk about how hard it was for her to be called into ministry in a church that only allows men to lead. You just don't understand people until you listen to them. Now, in an educational setting, you're kind of forced to sit there, right, until the class is over. But in real life, we can turn off the newscast, right, if we don't like it. We can stop reading that article. We can silence somebody by being more focused on how we're going to refute them than what they're saying. So what I'm going to ask you to do this morning is to think about your need for more skills. And here's how I want you to think about it. What kind of skills do you need to help you listen longer? To listen longer than it feels comfortable. I'm going to say it again. What kind of skills do you need that will help you to listen longer than it feels comfortable? When you feel uncomfortable, of course, is when we all disengage, when we all argue, when we turn it off. But maybe the very people that you want to turn off and argue against and refute are the very people who have the voice that you need to hear. I can't give you any better of example than a husband and wife. after years and sometimes decades, we get into these ruts of communication, or we stop communicating altogether, when that wife or that husband is the very person who knows you best and who has all kinds of things that you need to hear. But if you are in the habit of tuning them out or turning them off, or you can't hear what they have to say, and maybe God's even speaking to you through that husband or wife. And in the same way, maybe God wants to speak to you through that person who has a totally different perspective. And I mean totally different perspective than you on some of these social justice issues, on some of these issues of the day. What if people are just like you and they don't always know the best way to share what they're saying? And maybe still, whether it's your wife or whether it's somebody on the news, or it's somebody who wrote that article, or somebody who wrote that social media post, maybe even if they don't have the best way of sharing it, maybe there's something in what they're sharing that you really need to hear. In fact, maybe it's exactly what you need to hear. In fact, maybe God's calling you to have courage to stay in the article a little longer, to listen a little longer to the newscast, to listen a little more intently to your husband. Maybe there's something there that you actually need to hear. Maybe it's the very thing that you need to hear. And I'm hoping this song this morning is going to encourage you to listen like that, to have the kind of courage that you need to really listen well. Spreading like a virus, and hate is cheap. From afar it costs you nothing, sister, take my hand. Brother, we will stand and open up your heart and find love is turning over tables, breaking off chains. When I see you in the stranger, I'm no longer a slave. Turning over tables, tearing down walls, building up the bridges between us all. Let courage be my willingness to listen, so I can feel the wound inside my heart. Let seeds of peace grow in hearts around us. Let trees of hope bring shade to all mankind. You can take my hand, together we will stand. Open up your heart and find love is turning over tables, breaking off chains. When I see you in the stranger, I'm no longer a slave. Oh, turning over tables, tearing down walls, building up the bridges between us all. When will we stand for love? 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 None can separate all that love has made. We are everyone the same. We refuse to be our brother's enemy. We will stand for all mankind. So sister, take my hand. Brother, we will stand. Open up your heart and find love is turning over tables, breaking off chains. When I see you in the stranger, I'm no longer a slave. Oh, turning over tables, tearing down walls, building up the bridges between us all. May that song get stuck in your head, and may courage get stuck in your ear so you'll listen longer than it's comfortable.